Cord Jefferson is now an Emmy-nominated writer for his work on Watchmen. He was just nominated for the episode This Extraordinary Being. I'm Kevin Jacbosen of Gold Derby here with Cord. And to kick things off here, I mean, you had a number of shows that you were involved with at some point in this past TV season do very well at the Emmys this year, between Watchmen and Succession and The Good Place. What did all that recognition mean to you, and what was it like getting your first nomination on that morning?
I mean, just thrilling. It was, working on those shows. There are such extraordinary people involved with those shows in every facet of those shows. So, seeing those people be recognized was really gratifying. I think that it's an honor just to have worked with all of them, but even more of an honor for the public to recognize that as well. So. And for my own personal one, it was, absolutely. I love the work that I do, and I feel really, really honored and blessed that I get to do the work that I do anyway. So, but to sort of, in addition for that work to be recognized by my peers is, feels, it's even more of an honor. I'm truly grateful.
Well, speaking more broadly about Watchmen, before we get into this extraordinary episode, you were an executive story editor on all 9 episodes. So what kind of relationship did you have to the Watchmen source material between the graphic novel and the movie, and also what you thought of Damon Lindelof's vision for this kind of spiritual sequel?
Before Damon spoke to me about joining the writer's room, I had never read Watchmen before. I came to it sort of with fresh eyes, which Damon said he actually liked. He said he didn't want the room to be composed of a bunch of super fans of the original text. He said that he thought it was better. Some people came in as big fans, and other people weren't familiar with it at all. So I was the latter half of that group. And I think that, for me, what I really was drawn to when Damon first pitched the idea to me was the sort of grounded source, was sort of the grounded nature that he wanted to take with it. So the thing that I loved about it was that it was genre stuff, but sort of really steeped in a lot of American history and a lot of, real social problems that we were going through. So it didn't feel so fantastical. You had those fantastical elements that everybody's come to expect from a Lindelof project, but with this kind of like grounded, rich American history to root it all, which I loved.
And so working on This Extraordinary Being with Damon, it's such a bold concept to just thrust the audience back into Will Reeves' memories. What was the process of just coming up with that idea and realizing that you could actually make it work as the big sort of conceit of the episode?
I can't remember exactly how he came up with nostalgia, but I do believe that, that conceit of sending Angela back into the past, I think was helpful not only for her character, but also helpful for the audience. I think that episode 6 is where everything really started to solidify and fit into place for people who might have been confused by the previous 5 episodes. So, that was sort of like the missing puzzle piece, the missing link, as it were, between the sort of first half of the season and the back half of the season. So I think that, that was its importance as far as the storytelling was concerned. The nostalgia element of it, I think that, even the name nostalgia we wanted to play with, because we wanted to explore how nostalgia is different for people of color in America. So this idea that, like, throw things back to the 30s and juxtapose people nowadays saying that, make America great again, and that America used to be great, and that there was a time in American history that it was like excellent, and that, if you go back to the 40s and 50s, that's when America was actually very good. I think that the only people who are allowed to say that, the only people who are allowed to feel nostalgic for that in any real way, are straight white men. For literally every other group in society, things were markedly worse. And so calling it nostalgia, which a lot of people, I think, have they think of nostalgia as being this kind of good, gentle, whimsical thing, when I think for a lot of people who look like me and women and queer people, things were markedly worse, and it was a much worse place to be. So we don't get to share in that nostalgia. So I think that calling it nostalgia and putting Angela in her grandfather's shoes to sort of actually see what America was like back then is, that was one of the themes you really wanted to explore in that episode.
Right. And the whole idea of rose-colored glasses. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, looking at Will Reeves himself, when you go into writing this episode, do you have a clear idea in your mind of just who he is at his core, or did that sort of reveal itself as you were writing the episode?
So there was a few things that, well, I don't know about a few things. So Damon came in saying that he wanted Hooded Justice to be a black man. We didn't know at the outset who that was going to be. We sort of had to work backwards from that premise. So we knew that Hooded Justice was going to be black. We also knew from the source material that from Alan Moore's original text that that Hooded Justice had a sexual relationship with Captain Metropolis. And so those were the two things that we took sort of, well, that's the one thing that we took from the source material about who Hooded Justice was going to be, and the Damon's premise that he was going to be black. And from there, we just sort of had to work backwards. So all of the, he was joining the police force and that he was going to be married to this woman, June. That was all stuff that we started coming up with after we had those original two ideas. So that was creating that character of Will Reeves was, to me, one of the most gratifying parts of the entire show. I loved coming up with, I think that it's not unique for a writer to say that they love coming up with complex, layered human beings, because they're the most interesting to write for. But I'll be a cliche and say that, because he was a complex, layered, nuanced person. And I think that in my experience, those are always the most fun to write.
Well, the episode is so rich with details and layers. And I'm wondering, was there an element of the episode that was just important for you personally to include that actually did make it into the script?
Yeah, I think that, a lot of, I think that the story of the theme being generational trauma of that episode. It's a theme that is throughout the entire season, but I think particularly solidified in that episode, and the ways that the wounds of hundreds of years ago can come out and influence influence your family and your friends hundreds of years later. I think that is incredibly important to me. I think that as a Black American, there's no way to generational trauma, I think, is just part of the Black American story. Just the fact that these things that were happening literally hundreds of years ago are still oppressing us and influencing us nowadays. I think there's no way to not feel like generational trauma is part of your story as a Black American. And then beyond that, I think that Will's need to wear multiple figurative and literal masks, that he's a man who's hiding so much of himself from the people in his life because he believes that strength comes from stoicism and just never appearing vulnerable, and that vulnerability is weakness. I think that is something that I have felt in my life, and I think that a lot of Black men and women, for that matter, feel in their lives, that sort of you've been taught that any vulnerability is weakness, and that showing your softer side is could be a jeopardizes your safety and health. So I think that Will's need to mask himself in multiple masks, even with the white makeup and then a hood over that white makeup. I think that I identified with that pretty deeply. Yeah.
And this actually ties in with sort of how the episode begins, with this depiction of Hooded Justice on American Hero Story. And we see that history has remembered him as a white man. Why was it important to sort of kick off the episode with that sort of representation of whitewashing?
Just because it felt like a very, very, I think that Something that I've been thinking a lot about recently is this idea that, you always hear that the famous quote is that history is written by the victors, and that's not actually true in America. I've been thinking recently about all the Confederate monuments in America, and the Confederate flags hanging up all over the place, and realizing that the, the Confederacy lost, and yet the Confederacy rewrote history, and the Confederacy rewrote history in the way that it wanted to be rewritten in America, and America just sort of went along with that. And so we actually let the losers write history in America. And, I think that American history is just so often, so frequently given the right to rewrite history to white people. And so it would be unsurprising that this historical figure would be rewritten as white in American society. That being said, though, I think that the way that we've depicted him, it is fair for people to make the assumption that he was white, because Will Reeves, we're saying in our story, colored his skin as white, so and portrayed himself as a white person. So it is it's perhaps not fair to say that history rewriting him as white is too crazy, because that's how Will Reeves felt that he needed to depict himself in order to be accepted.
Right. Yeah. Were there discussions about kind of making the episode, making sure it was comprehensible for the viewer, since this is a memory, we're sort of going through things and things are disappearing, and there's Will and Angela switching in and out. Like, how many rewrites were there just to make sure that it was all somewhat clear for the audience what was happening?
There surprisingly weren't a ton of rewrites. That we sent in the draft to HBO, and I remember that their notes were actually pretty minimal, which I think both Damon and I found surprising, because there were a lot of there's a lot of big swings in the episode. There's like you said, with the ghosts of the past haunting him, and it's in black and white, and there's that weird door in the middle of the street, and so you sort of, I think that one thing that helped us along that ride, though, was that we say at the outset that we're going to take you through a drug trip, and so you're going to experience a drug hallucination. And so I think that once you sort of establish that as a foundation, it allows the audience to sort of like follow you into these more surreal elements of the storytelling. So that is that's one thing that we had to our benefit. And then I think that another thing was just pure execution. I think that Stephen did such a beautiful job at actually executing the vision, and coming in and making it feel very much like his own story also. So I think that there was multiple things that I think went into like achieving what we wanted to achieve in the story.
Well, speaking to the execution, actually, as a writer, when you see the concepts and the dialogue and just the world that you've created, all of that coming to life and be executed in such a spectacular way that this extraordinary being was, how does that feel for you? And then, seeing the audience response be so overwhelmingly positive as well.
It was, I couldn't, the night that the episode premiered, it was right before Thanksgiving, and I was traveling, and I ended up in New York City with one of my friends, and I told him, I said, I'm going to turn off my phone and not look at it for the next 6 hours. And so we went to a Broadway show. We went to see that David Byrne show on Broadway. Then we went out to dinner and had like a nice long leisurely dinner. And I just refused to look at my phone because I was so terrified of what the response would be, and incredibly nervous. I didn't end up actually looking until I think at like well after midnight. I finally like allowed myself to see what people were saying, and I was over the moon with the fact that people enjoyed it so much. I think that like I said, there was a lot of huge swings on in the episode that I wasn't sure how people were going to take to them. I had seen the cut before it premiered, and I was really proud of it, and I thought it was very good. But we were taking a lot of Hooded Justice had his own backstory as Alan Moore saw it in the original text, and so we were fiddling with that a little bit, obviously. And then besides that, the episode was very, very weird. So I had no idea what the response would be, and it made me incredibly anxious. I've got a lot of anxiety, So I was thrilled, and I was thrilled with how it came together. This is I think that sometimes making film and television feels like alchemy, and it feels like you need to actually sort of like do a little bit of magic to actually execute what you're trying to execute. And if one thing if one thing isn't done well, it feels like sometimes the whole thing can fall apart, and you're sort of like it feels like a Jenga building sometimes. So to see it really come together in a way that felt like not only did it meet my hopes, but also exceeded my hopes as to what it could be. It was a thrill, and it felt. That's how I ended up feeling about the whole season, also. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the show came out at the end of 2019, but in many ways, it feels like Watchmen kind of became the show of 2020, of our times, as far as depicting racism and police brutality and whitewashing and wearing masks even,
Yeah.
and then placing it in this world of superheroes and vigilantes, which is this genre that continues to be so popular. What have you thought about just how timely that Watchmen has become? And also, I guess, what are you hoping that people take away from the show?
The mass I could have never expected. that was a curveball. But I think that the prescience of the show is, I think, unfortunately, just due to the fact that we were writing about racial injustice in America. And I think that more so than the show, I think that history is prescient, right? Particularly when it comes to racism. So when you're writing about racism and racial injustice and racial trauma, that is something that is unfortunately just really baked into the fabric of America, and unfortunately something that we can't seem to get past. So I think that writing about that stuff feels really timely because it doesn't go away in the United States, unfortunately. So I would say, and as to what I think that what I wish people would take away from it, I don't know. I think that I'm a huge advocate of therapy. I do a lot of therapy, and I think that one of the things that therapy has taught me is to explore my past and to mine my past for explanations as to why I feel the way that I feel nowadays and do the things that I do nowadays. And so I think that I don't want the show to feel didactic or to feel like we're giving you lessons about how to live your life. I don't think that I ever want to say exactly what the meaning is of something, but I would say that if the show causes someone to think about their own origin story, and to think about their history, and to think about how their history is, and their family's history, and this country and world's history is influencing the things that they're doing nowadays, I think that that would make me happy if that's what it caused some people to do.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Cord, for your time today, and congrats
Thank
again
you.
on your Emmy nomination.
Thank you so much.
Best of luck
I really
with the
appreciate
ceremony.
it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And for those of you watching, hit like and subscribe for more Emmy season interviews, and head to goldderby.com to make your Emmy predictions.